Hi, this is Julie. In this video we're going to look at a brief introduction to the concept of place value, and specifically place value for whole numbers. So one thing that we need to know before we talk about place value is about how our number system works. And an important thing to know about our number system is that we have what's called a decimal number system. So what does that mean? Well, the word decimal comes from Greek and Latin words that mean 10. And that's important because our number system is based on sets of 10. So when we look at large numbers, we tend to group them into sets of 10 or multiples of 10. So we actually do this all the time in everyday life because our money system is also a decimal system. So say, for example, that I have a big jar of pennies. And I dump out this jar of pennies. I want to count how many pennies I've got in the jar. And say that I go ahead and I just count the pennies and I come up with 537. So I've got 537 pennies in this jar. I could say that I've got 537 cents, but usually we don't do that. Usually when we talk about big amounts, we talk about them in terms of dollars and cents. So what I would think about instead is that I know that in the number system, 1 penny would be 1 penny. It has the value of 1 penny. And if I have 10 pennies, that's the same thing as a dime. So 10 cents is the same thing as a dime. And then I know that if I've got 100 pennies or 10 dimes, that I've got the same thing as a dollar. And so if I'm thinking about that 537 pennies that I have, and I'm just going to abbreviate, 537 pennies, I could take 500 of those pennies, and that would give me $5. And then I'd have 37 cents left over. Well, 30 of those cents I could make into 3 dimes, and then I'd have 7 pennies left over at the very end. So we're pretty used to breaking this, breaking money amounts down, putting them into groups of tens and groups of 100, and thinking in that sort of a way about our money, and sort of switching things back and forth between, say, pennies and dollars or dimes and dollars. So in our number system, we do the same thing. We have what's called a place value system that takes groups of tens and arranges them into a specific order. So the smallest group that we start off with is the ones group. That'd be sort of like our pennies. Then we have tens. The tens group would be sort of like the dimes if we're thinking of a money system. And 10, of course, is just 10 times 1. And so the tens group is 10 times bigger than the ones group. Our next group would be the hundreds group. And 100, of course, is 10 times 10. So the hundreds group is 10 times bigger than the tens group. And this pattern continues. So 1,000 is 10 times 100. And the thousands group then is 10 times bigger than the hundreds group. And it keeps going that way on up the chart. So up to 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, 10 millions, 100 millions, billions, and we could even keep going to bigger numbers. Every time that we go from one group up to the next size group, it's always 10 times bigger. So this brings us to place value. If we have big numbers, so think about in our number system, we have 10 digits that we rearrange into different orders, and we can make any size number, really, really small numbers, really, really big numbers, with just those 10 digits. What's important, what place value means, is that where the digit is in the number, the actual place that it falls into, tells us its value. So in this number here, for example, say that I wanted to know the specific value of this number 8. Well, the position of the 8, the fact that it's the 4th number over from the end, tells me what value it represents. So if I line this up with, here's my place value chart, I can see that the 8 lines up with the thousands place. And so that tells me that the value of that 8 is that it represents 8 groups of 1,000. Or if I were asked the question, what's the place value of the digit 8, I would say that it's in the thousands place, or that it represents 8 thousands. Now, we can also, you can use a place value chart like this to figure out the value of a digit in a number. You can also sort of memorize the place value chart, and it's pretty easy to do if you notice a couple of patterns that are going on here. One is that we have this sort of repeating pattern of ones, tens, and hundreds that occurs in groups of 3s, and that happens in the last 3 digits of numbers, of big numbers. And then if we look at the group of place values that represents thousands, we've got 1,000s, even though we don't really write the word 1 in front of it usually, 10,000s, and then 100,000s. Same thing happens when we get to the millions. We've got 1 millions, 10 millions, 100 millions, and then the same thing would repeat as we go into the billions and to bigger place values. Another thing that we can use to help us is that usually every 3 digits, so every repeating pattern of 3 of that 1, 10s, hundreds pattern, we put commas in between the numbers. And that's not to change the value of the number at all. It's to help us read the number, to help us organize those digits, and to sort of identify where those patterns repeat. So that's the basics for place value. In the next video, we'll look at a couple of different examples of identifying place value.